You're listening to A Mighty Fortress.
Good morning and welcome to A Mighty Fortress. I'm your host, Jake Zabel, and joined with me today are friends of the show, the famous musician, Joseph Ingram.
Greetings.
The composer of the greatest hymn of the 21st century, Oh My God, written by yours truly. Also joining me is fellow seminarian, Joseph Graham.
Woo!
And other fellow seminarian, Joseph Theodorson.
Hi, Mum.
So today, I've brought the Josephs on to do Fortress News, where we go through the Lutheran magazines, the World in Brief segment, and go through the news articles. Normally, I just get Joseph Ingram to help me with this, and we only normally do one edition. But since I've got 3 issues of the Lutherans that I haven't done for a while, I've brought on 3 Josephs to help me do 3 Lutherans.
That's the way.
A Mighty Fortress, at most only 3 months away from the time.
Exactly.
This is Fortress News with Jake Zabel and Joseph Ingram.
To A Mighty Fortress. Living in the past, because it was better than the present. Cool. So I've got the April edition of the Lutheran now, so we can look at some news from a couple of months ago.
So we start with A for April.
Yeah, that's the plan. That'd be bad, because then we'd have to go June and May. Not so it'd be in alphabetical and chronological order.
No, J comes before M.
Yeah, exactly, but May comes before June.
Oh, you're right.
So, the first story we've got here is called Christian Boom in Nepal.
Ooh.
That sounds pretty explosive.
Yes. Hopefully they didn't die.
Traditionally a Hindu nation, Nepal now has one of the fastest growing Christian populations in the world. The newspaper there, the Nagarik, says the latest census shows the statistical rise of Christianity across Nepal. It listed no Christian in 1951 and just about 458 in 1961. But by 2001, there were over 100,000.
Wow.
While a decade later, so now, they are 375,000.
Sweet.
And last year's earthquake may have strengthened the Christian surge, with the government leaving poor villages to be helped by aid groups, from some of whom carry the gospel message. Joseph, what do you think of that?
I think that's a pretty good news story.
Thanks, Joseph.
My pleasure.
I wonder what kind of Christianity it is that spreads like that. It's interesting to know how deep and meaningful it is.
It could also be multiple different denominations, and then that's generally not helpful in a new setting, because, let's convert over to this thing. Wait, do they know what they believe? Because these guys say one thing and these guys say another.
These guys say consubstantiation, these guys say transubstantiation.
I don't understand what anything means.
This guy say it's just a symbol. These guys ordain women. Cool. The next story is abolish death penalty. Pope Francis.
One Pope, Francis, you're the only one that I could live for. One Pope, Francis, you're the only one that I could live for.
One Pope, Francis.
Pope Francis has called for the worldwide abolition of the death penalty, saying the commandment, "You shall not kill," is equally valid for the guilty as for the innocent. The Pope, who had visited a number of jails since his election, also called for better prison conditions and denounced life imprisonment, calling it a hidden death penalty. He made the comments in support of an international conference against the death penalty organised by worldwide Catholic justice groups.
Well, that is actually a big topic. So what did Luther say on it?
Well, Luther leaves it in the government sphere. That it's up for the the church and the state need to remain separate.
But that's okay for the... Oh, sorry.
That's all right. We had a quote earlier in Reform this semester that was from Luther saying that it's all right for a Christian to commit capital punishment.
Yeah.
So to actually be an executioner. So
yeah, well...
That's Luther's thoughts on it at that point in time.
Because the sword belongs to the government realm. And so the sword's there to punish crime. The state is there to punish crime, and the church is there to forgive sin.
The reason the Roman Catholics can do it, though, is because they don't have a split of church and state.
Yeah, so they're the same thing.
That's why the Pope... Well, he only rules Vatican City now, but I'm sure he'd like to rule more.
Oh, he would. He would love to extend the papal states all over the world and call it Vatican World, not Vatican City.
Vatican World.
It sounds like a theme park. Welcome to Vatican World.
Right, the mighty Pope coaster. What do you suppose would be the case then if he wants to abolish life imprisonment as well? Then what's he going to do?
Well, apparently that would mean we'd have to let people out of... If we can't kill them, we can't hold them in prison. Yeah, we can't keep them in prison forever. We can't kill them. That means we have to therefore let people out eventually.
Well, I suppose that could work because, well, for one thing, in Australia, I'm pretty sure, isn't the life penalty like 25 years?
Yeah, life sentence 25 years. That's why for terrorists it's normally multiple life sentences plus 100 years without parole, just so that they're in there till they die.
Yeah.
Unless they live to be about 200, which would be pretty incredible.
Yeah.
One of the things that they could do...
They live that long, I think we let them out.
is if there's something really messed up with the prisoner, just stick him in a psych ward or something like that.
In an insane asylum.
Yeah, I mean, that happens as well.
Yeah.
And they have clauses where, like, if they're a continued threat, then they just delay the release date.
Yeah.
So it can go longer than 25 years.
Mm.
And I think particularly with seriously bad, well, all of them are pedophiles and that, who are seen as a serious repeat offender.
Mm.
That just keeps them in there.
Yeah. But then, with the actual call to abolish the death penalty, on the grounds of the...
Commandment, thou shalt not kill.
The fifth one? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The fifth commandment.
By the Lutheran and Catholic. Right?
Yes. I think that's actually fairly good grounds.
Okay.
And then when he mentions the... not only does that apply to the innocent, but also to the guilty, I was kind of sitting there thinking, everyone's guilty.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it applies to the guilty.
Mm. But then again, that's like I said, the state has its laws. The state laws and the church's laws are different. That's why it's like how we can have soldiers can go to war and kill people in war, and capital punishment all comes under that same sphere. It's for civil control and running of the world.
Don't get me wrong, democracy is pretty good. But one of the interesting things about the separation of church and state within a democracy is if you're part of a church, you're a Christian, you're also part of the state. And in a democracy, your opinion matters.
Yeah.
So if you had a 90% majority of Christians in a democratic state, then there wouldn't really be a perceivable separation of church and state.
Yeah.
So that's where the issues sort of come up. In a democratic world, if the Christians vote against capital punishment, then that's probably the good Christian thing to do. It's just, it kind of gets weird. It makes the separation of church and state a grey line that sort of moves about, and it makes it more difficult to distinguish this is church and this is state, and you can't mix the two. Because in a democratic society, you have to. At least to some extent. Yeah. It helps when the church is a lot smaller than the majority, because then there is a separation. But when it's a majority, then you'd expect the 10 Commandments to
rule the nation.
I think I prefer the majority option, personally.
What? You plan on committing a capital crime?
That's not my motivation.
I'm not sure the default position of most Christians is to abolish capital crime anyway.
No. But then
Capital
if you
crime.
go by...
Capital crime.
The policy capital crime would certainly be.
But
It'd certainly be up there.
if you take the Ten Commandments, then it should be.
Yeah.
Wait, no.
I think if you're looking at the old law
Yeah?
with inverted commas, then you also need to take what God said to Noah about life being demanded for life. So, yes, the 10th, one of the commandments says, thou shalt not kill, but God also told Noah that blood will be demanded for blood. So,
Yes, but
how do you-
in the
how do you
New
merge them
Testament,
together?
we don't have to judge them. Jesus is going to judge them.
Yeah, it is the sense that judgment does belong to God.
Yeah. But then we can point out the judgment in the Bible because it's plain to see there. And
Yeah. We still have we've been given the sword to do stuff. And
makes it different.
well, it's like even I think you said the good thing would to not have capital punishment, but then the good thing would also not to have any crime or any war and not have a need for capital punishment.
Yes. I
don't know.
totally agree.
Capital punishment is war. It's one of those necessary evils that you kind of do to prevent greater evils.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then with that,
That's why it's in the realm of the state.
You probably have to, with that, you'd have to be... Because even when Luther has his whole big thing on the just war, which you can go back and listen to an early episode of A Mighty Fortress, I touched on that. And so Luther has all these requirements on what makes a war just. Like it has to be winnable, and it should be between two equals and not an inferior versus superior, and all this stuff. So I think there has to be the same kind of thing with capital punishment. There has to be a concept of a just capital punishment.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so you need to make
you have
sure.
it, you definitely need that.
Yeah.
But then again, in Australia, we don't have capital punishment.
Yeah.
So this is all a bit in the air for us.
I also think it's good then for, with not mixing church and state. When we had that, the death penalty case of those two guys over in Indonesia last year,
right.
where people were calling for Christians and all that to try and, protest and cause the Indonesian government to change its laws.
It's their law.
Oh yeah, it's their law,
Yeah.
and it's not for. Firstly, it's not for. Just Christians should not be interfering with the state in that way of enforcing it. But also, that's a different country. It's not our right to go over there and tell that country how to run their ways. Which I think.
Unless we take them over.
Well, I go as soon
Just war.
as soon as we actually
Save the criminals.
said, as soon as the Australian government had actually said to the Indonesian government, "Don't do this." Well, at that point, it was going to happen because now you can't just come along and start trying to throw your weight around because then the Indonesian government's going to go, well, now we have to do it in order to prove that we're not going to get pushed around.
Yeah.
The second we stepped in, we pretty much affirmed those guys' fates.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving on to...
Well, just-
okay, go on.
I think in summary,
Yep.
we don't disagree with what the Pope said.
Mm-hmm.
But if the countries that still have capital punishment and full life sentences keep them, we also don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Because it's in the realm of the state, not in the realm of the church. So in this case, we don't have... this is a alright story.
Yeah, cool. So moving on. Cool. So now we can move on to May, if Joseph will permit us to go chronologically and not alphabetically.
If you must.
No.
Cool. So the first story I've got here from the May edition of The Lutheran is the Polish Church keeps status quo. No, I'm sorry, that's the Polish Church.
The Polish church. Is that deliberate?
Not at all. Never. I would never deliberately make a joke like that. This story is just confusing and abysmal.
Okay.
So
How so, Jake?
I will explain, Joseph.
Please do.
So, the Synod of the Polish Lutheran Church in Warsaw last month, a majority voted in favour of the women's ordination to the pastoral ministry. However, just like it was in Australia, they didn't reach the 2/3 majority and therefore did not change the bylaws of the church.
However, this is the part that is the most confusing aspect of this story. Since 1963, women graduates of theology have been able to teach, conduct services, and provide pastoral care in congregations.
Okay.
Then since 1999, that women were allowed to become ordained as deacons, allowing them to conduct baptisms, funerals, and marriages.
Okay.
So basically, you can be a pastor. We just can't call you a pastor.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't mentioned Holy Communion yet.
However, they cannot be ordained as pastors, which the Evangelical Church of the Augsburg Confession in Poland means that they are not allowed to lead. Congregations or preside over Holy Communion. So in other words, they're doing everything a pastor does except Holy Communion, and therefore they're not ordained.
And being the accountable leader.
Yeah. So
okay.
Which I've seen that happen in some Anglican churches where they have women will be doing everything except they'll still have like the one head pastor who'll get up and he'll be a male. And this is, Anglican churches in Australia.
Yeah.
And they'll get
church ordains women now anyway, don't
Oh yeah, but
depends on which one.
Yeah, different dioceses. But I've seen ones where they'll have they have all the women up the front, and the women will preach and they'll do this stuff and that. But when it comes to communion, then they have the actual chief pastor who's a man. He will be the one that does the communion.
I don't know about you guys, but to me,
it's a way of having
that
women...
sort of sounds more patriarchal than just having men doing the thing.
Yeah,
because it's like, oh yeah, you can do all this stuff, but you need to have a man looking over you.
Yeah.
Whereas with having men only in the ordained ministry, it's saying this is job for men. And then there's other jobs for women that are the jobs for women.
Yeah, complementarianism.
Which isn't that the men are more important than the women. But in this one, it's like...
different, but...
you can't have a woman pastor unless you got a male pastor above her.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's now putting...
That's weird.
It's now creating a new levelling system that wasn't there.
Well, I dare say that sort of... have all of those decisions for what they've allowed women to do in that church come from synodical votes, or have the...
yeah, I'm assuming so, yeah.
Well, it's
from
like
the world
I'd be interested to know, because
in.
I dare say that's what's happening.
Yeah, and so
the top
people
down's
sort of get
introducing
used to it.
things piece by piece, basically trying to make the church realise, we might as well vote this in because it's happening anyway.
Yeah, well, that's the annoying side is you're going...
other organisations.
That's 50 years.
They're pretty much pastors. They're just not pastors in name.
Yeah.
They're doing almost everything a pastor can do. We're just not calling them pastors. Therefore, those who don't agree with women's ordination can't really complain about it.
Yeah.
And apparently, to be a pastor only means that you preside over Holy Communion.
That's pretty much...
That's the only thing that...
So baptisms, weddings,
pastor
funerals,
does.
they don't count as pastoral roles.
No.
Neither does teaching or conducting services or pastoral care. They don't count as pastoral roles. Anybody can do them.
It's not actually pastoral care, it's laypersonish care.
Well, they said pastoral care, so...
Yeah,
if a layperson does pastoral care, would that make them a pastor?
Well, it depends. What sort of pastoral care are they doing? Are they caring for their sheep? Like literal sheep?
Like a
then it's okay.
Like a literal pastor?
Would that be pastoral care?
How does the saying go? It's like the devil is a serpent or something, and if he can get his head through the crack, then the rest of him comes through.
Oh yeah, if you can get his head through the crack, then he can get the rest of his body through.
I mean, it's...
hopefully he gets stuck and you chop off the head and then he dies.
Yeah, because it's almost like... It's like they're trying to allow it in bit by bit.
Yeah.
And it's just that sort of idea that
But
I've heard you talk about it before, the idea that even if we might appear really conservative or whatever and then there are people that are saying, some matters aren't really a problem.
Yeah.
It's like you let all of these things creep in and gradually they compound to the point that it just ends up being a much larger...
I imagine it almost like if you have a big stone wall, you take out one stone, the wall's not necessarily going to fall straight away. But if you start taking out more and more stones, eventually the wall's going to come down. Plus, the analogy with that is when you take out one stone, now you open up gaps for the serpents to slither through, so they can actually get in now.
But just
corrupt the church.
Think now about how hard it would be even if women's ordination does not get in, for them to remove all of these other policies that they've got about having female deacons and all that sort of stuff that do almost all these other things that the pastor does.
Because breaking it up like they've done means that you have to deal with each separate issue,
and that's going to be that would be so hard to rectify.
Well, I like what Joseph said there, going, because pretty much all they've done now is they've turned the office of the ministry into just Holy Communion,
and accountability,
which has now given lay people the rights to do all the things that are necessary reserved for the office of the ministry
publicly as well. Yeah.
I find baptism and marriage is interesting.
Yeah, generally marriage, I don't know about in Europe, but I know in Australia it's governed by the government.
It's a state thing, it's not a church thing.
So, in reality, lay people do perform marriages and these sorts of things, but in the Christian church it's just kind of weird.
Yeah, you don't get a lay person up in a Lutheran church doing it.
No, well, not in the LCA.
Yeah.
The Lutheran.
I don't know about that.
Cool. Well, unless anyone's got more comments to make about women's ordination,
No.
we can move on to the June edition. Our third Lutheran for the episode.
My goodness, June, that's like this month.
Wow, we're actually on time for once.
And also, not only that, but June starts with the letter J, as does Jake and Joseph, as well as Joseph and Joseph.
Man, I didn't realise that Joseph and Joseph all started with J. I'm pretty sure one of them started with a K there for a minute.
Isn't
Jake, you need to learn how to spell.
There's this product you can buy in the in like the Maya stores and whatever called Joseph. It's a brand name. It's like they make these fancy multicoloured plastic kitchen utensils.
I want to get some Joseph.
Yeah,
It's just Joseph.
It's called Joseph.
So the first story we've got here for the June edition is Movie Moves Philippines Villages. Pretty sure there should be some kind of apostrophe there.
Where's it moving them?
Scenes from the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of... Hey, this is incorrect. The movie was actually called The Passion of the Christ. They've actually cut out the word the.
Oh, it's Passion of Christ.
Yeah, so
It was
take
the
that.
Passion of the Christ,
You can't even spell.
You're not allowed to read the Lutheran anymore.
The Lutheran...
What, because they've got bad grammar?
Yeah.
I've got bad grammar. Does that mean you can't read me either?
Yes.
Okay.
Nobody can read what you write because you got that bad grammar.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
My grandma's pretty cool. She cooks nice.
That's what we need. More puns. That's how we convert people. Anyway, this movie has reportedly had a dramatic effect on the mission work among the Manobo people in the Philippines. A local ministry team has spent 8 months building a relationship with tribal people in this area. During that time, mission leaders had studies working through the Bible with locals, and now to bring the gospel teaching to life, the leader showed them brief clips from the Passion of Christ movie. Reports say that many of the villagers expressed anger at the mistreatment of Jesus, but when the leader explained that his death and resurrection was the way of salvation, many of those present were moved to embrace Christianity. So I guess you could say many of them were cross, but then they were happy.
I see what you did there.
Good.
Joseph does as well.
Far from Mindanao.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. I can appreciate the being angry at seeing someone who apparently has done a whole lot of good things that you've just been told about getting beaten up because he did a whole lot of good things that you've just been told about.
Yeah. I mean, the Passion of the Christ is a good movie to make you realise the severity of crucifixion. Well, I remember I've heard someone say once, the biggest problem with the Passion of Christ is that it doesn't go far enough. Because it only really shows the physical torture Jesus went through. Not all. You can't really show all the emotional and mental and the spiritual torture that he went through.
Apparently they're making part 2.
Really?
Yeah, the resurrection. Focusing on the resurrection. I was just
I've heard of that.
That won't be so gruesome.
The resurrection of the Christ was. I heard they were going to call it. I think it's another Mel Gibson's doing it as well. So
is Jesus going to appear very often? Because in most of the accounts of the resurrection, he's not there.
That's a good point. As long as they do the Ascension part better than they did in the movie Risen.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, Risen's a great movie. As I heard them say on Issues, etc., the movie was great up until the part where Jesus appears. Well, the whole first half of the movie, I can't seem to find a fault with it in the whole first half, where you've just got the centurion running around trying to figure if Jesus is alive. But then the whole second half of the movie, when Jesus appears, there's heaps of problems with it. First of all, the fact that there was no Roman centurion that followed the 11 apostles at that stage around as they witnessed the Ascension and all that. I'll give you poetic license because there's no way to continue the story through the centurion's eyes if he's not there. But even that, there's certain parts. I did a review on this on an earlier episode of A Mighty Fortress you can go back and listen to. Like, when they do the Lord's, they have, instead of doing grace, they have the Lord's Prayer. And it is the most irreverent prayer version of the Lord's Prayer I've ever seen. They're just sitting around joking and tossing loaves of parts of bread everywhere. And I'm like, have you no respect? You guys are meant to be the 11 apostles. It wasn't well done. And then the Ascension, instead of actually having Jesus ascend up into the clouds like it says in the Bible,
I will ascend.
He walked towards the sunrise that was just coming over on the horizon, and he just exploded into a big beam of light. And I'm like, that's not at all what the Ascension was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the spoiler alert.
It's definitely more accurate than the Noah movie.
I still haven't watched that.
Pretty much.
Giants are awesome.
Pretty much. The fact that there was a flood, an ark, and a guy named Noah, that's pretty much the amount of the accuracy in it.
Well, let's get back to the topic.
The topic at hand.
Good on him. Yeah, I think
brilliant.
I didn't mind that movie. I thought it was quite powerful.
It's great to hear that more people have come to the faith.
That area too. It's quite an Islamic stronghold in Mindanao. We won't go to Mindanao because a lot of.
I think our last story for this episode will have protest over same-sex marriage move. I love this. It's got Lutheran in brackets, so it's kind of like the Lutheran Church in Norway. Decision to allow same-sex marriage has come under fire from some clergy in the state church. In a vote at its annual conference in April, 88 delegates backed the change, while 32 were opposed. Reverend Dag, Joseph, you can say this guy's name.
Okay.
Just don't let my dad hear it. Øyvind Østerling.
Yep.
Norwegian apparently is really bad, but it's better than yours.
In other words, Reverend Dag, prominent.
He's such a dag.
A prominent. Oh no, that's hilarious.
It's actually Dag.
He's such a dag.
I'm sticking with a prominent figure in the Church of Norway. Confessional wing said the new position was contrary to the Bible and gathered ecclesiastical and ecumenical tradition, and has committed to resign. It is unclear how many Norwegian clergy and lay people may follow him. Just before the vote, 200 priests released a declaration on the ecclesial situation, expressing doubt about their continued participation in the church if same-sex marriage were approved. The vote to approve a same-sex wedding liturgy included allowing for priests and other church workers to refuse to participate in gay marriages.
For now. Hold on a second. When it says a liturgy allowed for them to not... What was the term?
Participate.
Not participate. So it's just like the pastor starts the liturgy. We are gathered together here to witness the wedding of Mr. Bruce and Mr. James or whatever. And then it's just like, oh, but I actually don't want to participate in this, so I'm not taking this service. The end.
Yeah.
It's like, that's part of the liturgy.
I think
that's what I thought.
I'm pretty sure. I'd like to see write a same-sex marriage liturgy. We are gathered here today to acknowledge the abomination of.
The reason, just as a clarification, that Lutheran is in brackets is because it is the Church of Norway.
Okay.
It's a state church, but
it's
it
a Lutheran.
happens to be Lutheran.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for that, Joseph. This is why we have you here.
A state church. So does that mean that, again, there is not a separation of church and state, or am I confusing?
Yes, that'd be about right.
Yes and no.
It's very
the government's very secular, but it is a state church that's paid by taxes, not offerings and things like that. So yeah,
I've been told that
it's the official religion, but it's only 50-odd% membership.
Yeah,
of which maybe only 30 or 40% is actually believing, if that.
Oh, yep. 34% of the 50%. Yeah.
I think it's good that we got some pastors there taking a stand.
I think it's fascinating that this kind of change seems to come from the laity.
Oh, you mean to introduce gay marriage comes from the laity?
I'm not that surprised.
No, but I think
I've been in the LCA, and the teaching, at least in the LCA, isn't that comprehensive for the younger generations and these sorts of people.
There's no definitive statements, and
they're just not told.
Yes, that's right. They're not.
Yeah, we have definitive statements.
I don't know if the other churches have the same problems, but yeah.
I dare say every church in the Western world's got this kind of problem at the moment.
Sort of apathy towards any teaching.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the fear of offence.
Yeah, I suppose.
I'm scared of a gate.
Pickets.
Fence, gate.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
Fear of a fence, fear of a gate. Yeah. It was a bad pun because I had to explain it.
Yeah, jokes are funnier when you explain it.
Yeah. I hold to the Brian Wolfmuller School of Hilarity. Jokes are funnier when you explain them.
Yeah, people laugh at you more when you explain them.
Yeah, that's sort of humour. Yeah, look, I think the thing is, we've got statements on what we believe, and they're not known or not accepted.
We have plenty of people that will belong to a church but not hold to the teachings of said church.
But I mean, the laity send people through seminary and to study these kinds of things to formulate our statements on belief.
Yeah, formulate our own
and then they
knowledge.
Say, oh no, we're not going to believe that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big problem. Like you said, there's a big problem in a lot of churches that there's just the big disconnect between the laity and the pastors, where the pastors are the ones that have gone and done all this training, and yet it's the laity who want to make all the decisions around the church. And generally, they haven't done a lot of the laity haven't done any training. They haven't done a lot of research, and a lot of what they're teaching is based on their own personal experiences and not on theological studies.
And then sometimes the reason the laity don't do much research is because, I pay the pastor to do that for me.
Why are we letting untrained lay people make the important decisions of the church?
It's a tough one because you can't just have the ministers in supreme authority.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it's not a dictatorship, but what is it? Who is responsible in the church for such?
Well, that's generally why what we do is, in the general practice of the LCAs, we normally have everything goes through pastors' conference first, where we have the theologians discuss it, and then afterwards we get the lay people to come into it.
The lay people, though, is with the Synod, and the Synod is 1/3 pastors, 2/3 lay people.
Yeah, so at least we've got some pastors in there, it also helps.
Interestingly, that method was not entirely utilised this last Synod.
Yes.
How do you mean?
Whoever was presiding over it jumped the gun because Pastors' Conference couldn't come up with a recommendation for Synod, Under as far as I'm aware, that means that
we're not allowed to vote
couldn't go to vote in the Synod, but they put it to vote in the Synod. This is women's ordination.
Yeah, because if I'm correct, and people can correct me on this if I'm wrong, I'm happy to have that. Because isn't the practice, what we normally do is the pastors will come to an agreement at pastors' conference, have like a statement, that statement goes to the Synod, and then the Synod votes upon that statement.
As far as I'm aware, that sounds
that's my understanding of the practice. And then, because since we didn't have a statement at the last Synod, they ended up putting one statement for, one statement against, and then you voted on that.
Yeah, that's right.
We vote, I think it was a vote just on the statement for, and then if that didn't pass, then the statement against
was okay. Yeah,
except something like that. I can't remember.
But even then, because wasn't there like multiple statements put forth?
There was quite a number.
Because each of them would have different levels of stuff.
On the against women's ordination, there was 2, and they were fairly different. On the for women's ordination, there was about 14 or something like that. But the wording was all very similar for all of them, and I had to look through a skim over a lot of them, and it didn't seem that any of them had a particularly different view, so they just went with one of them from one of the major churches. Yeah. And
because I just mean there's got to be different levels on stuff, and people. Because I'm totally for. I hold with Lutheran. I'm totally for ordaining women in those cases where there are no men available. So
no capable men.
Yeah. So if you have like men that are unable to preach, or if it's children, or like there's a congregation full of only women, then you should get a woman up to be the pastor. So, I would say women's ordination's okay in circumstances.
No, none of the
I don't think
propositions were, that wasn't in any of the propositions.
Yeah. No, plus there's also the level of going, we've got there's women's ordination, but then what about women's as bishops and stuff like that? That's a whole nother kettle of fish altogether.
But then coming back to the Norwegians and that was homosexual marriage, wasn't it?
And you got people.
One of the interesting things is I'm aware that in Sweden there is multiple Lutheran churches. I know there's at least 2. There might be 3. One of them's the state church.
Yeah.
I don't know the case in the Norwegian church. Well, Norwegian churches, I should say. But it always brings up the question of when something like that happens.
Yeah.
What do we do if our viewpoint is the one being shunted out, like this? The case with this pastor. Do they go and they could leave the country? They could form their own church. They could try and join another church. And there's a whole lot of different questions there with how they go about doing it.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be easy, especially in cases like this when you've got a large church body. There's not an even split of who believes what. So you might have 10 people in a 50-person congregation.
Well, what they say, out of the clergy or whatever, you had 88 for it and 32 against it.
And the majority voted for it at Synod, but is that majority vote at Synod really representative of the majority?
Yeah.
Because as a representative I was told to make my vote. I wasn't told, in fact it was almost explicitly mentioned to not get the vote from the congregation, but make your own vote.
Which is not what a representative is meant to be.
Exactly, the whole point is to get the feel from the
congregation.
But
then even if your
congregation anyway.
Which is a bad way to do things. If you got one pastor, say you had a congregation that was 99% of the congregation was for something, but the pastor was against it, he'd just select the 1 or 2 people that are against it and send them off and have them vote.
The pastor doesn't select the delegate.
The congregation generally does. As far as
however it runs. But as you said, it's not an accurate representation of what people view.
You get a particular congregation that's 50-50, and the delegate can only vote one way. or you get 60-40s and 40-60s and 70-30s. It's just not.
No.
I don't know. It would be interesting to have an actual.
But then even in the case,
vote.
in the case that you have
Is
like
that
90% one way.
That'd be interesting to have like the entire
plebiscite.
have everybody, like every confirmed member vote.
Oh.
That'd be an interesting way to see.
Every confirmed member that still comes to church.
I'd say every active member.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you've got the problem of trying to decide who's. Well, I've been to church 3 times this year. Does that make me an active member? Or I've been once a month.
Become more than it depends if the third one was a baptism, not just Easter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Easter, Christmas, and baptisms. No.
Yeah.
But good on you for coming to those.
Yeah.
But you don't get a vote.
It's always a difficult decision when you've got big amounts of change in the church. Sometimes for the better, I'm sure, but a lot of the times it sounds like nowadays for the worst, because you just see the increasing secularization of state churches in Europe.
Well,
not just Europe.
Not just Europe, but we don't have many state churches outside of Europe.
The state church.
From what I've heard, the only time you've ever had a massive big confessional conservative swing in like a Lutheran synod was Missouri Synod, back when they had the whole big SameSex and that
I heard about
conflict ages ago.
I don't know too much about it. But anyway.
The thing was generally, I'm not a big expert on the matter, but like Missouri Synod was in chats with. There were 2 groups. There was, because at that point in history, there was your 3 main groups. There was the LCA, the ALC, and Missouri Synod over in America.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. The Lutheran Church of America and American Lutheran Church, and the Missouri Synod, I think, was in chat with the ALC. They were in chats with.
Yeah.
I may be wrong in that, but they were in chats with one of them.
Yeah.
And because of those chats, so the LCA was your more liberal branch, Missouri was more conservative, and the ALC was probably your more moderate to between.
Yeah.
And Missouri, through their dialogues, were starting to shift more liberal.
Oh, okay.
And so. But then they got a new president in, had a massive big swing back towards the conservatives, which that broke all dialogue they had with the ALC, and the ALC ended up joining with the LCA, forming the current ELCA in America.
Oh, okay.
But with the Missouri Synod, what happened was there's the big seminary walkout where nearly 99% or whatever the lecturers said. Because the bishop came down and said, "You guys got to stop teaching this. You guys are all teaching all this stuff. You can't teach
criticism,
and all this stuff like that. So you can't teach that."
Yeah.
And then the lecturers, it wasn't like the fact that the majority of the lecturers are liberal. There's probably plenty of conservatives. They just didn't like being told what to do. So their idea was, if we threaten a walkout, the higher ups will back off, and with that. The higher ups didn't back off. The higher ups came down and said this, and majority. I think if I'm correct, it's all bar 2 of whatever of the lecturers actually walked out, and then they started their own seminary called SameSex, Seminary in Exile.
Oh, okay.
But then eventually all that, there was a little small group called the American Evangelical Lutheran Church that formed. They were the liberal group that then left Missouri. Okay. And they jumped in with the ALC and the LCA to form the ELCA.
Yeah, okay.
But then, there were members in the ALC that didn't want to join ELCA. They were the more conservatives, and they formed what's now known as the Association of American Lutheran Churches, the AALC, which is now the only American church in ultra-corporate fellowship with Missouri Synod.
Yeah, okay.
So after about 50 years or so, they've actually gone back in dialogue with one of these groups.
Wow.
And I've actually heard rumours or so that Missouri Synod's thinking of now, with the 500-year anniversaries of Reformation coming up, just re-engage dialogue with Wells and Ells.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So, that's positive. But yeah, that's the only time I can think of that there's been a massive big confessional swing within Lutheran churches.
I know that there's been splits on confessional grounds, but I don't know
never like a whole synod swinging. Yeah. There's always splits when a liberal swing comes in.
Like it looks like it might happen in Norway. Yeah, or probably will happen in Norway.
Well, yeah.
Well, you actually said what is that?
Left. There's 200 that said that they probably, or they'd said
200 will leave.
Whether they will or not will.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it'll be that high. I mean, you get a lot of the ones that will.
Even if
that say we will leave, but then when it actually comes time to leave, a lot of them.
It's even if only half of them leave, that's a large.
That's a large amount, yeah.
To just go.
Yeah.
And as a layperson, that should give you full food for thought.
I mean, if you lose, like even that, like you said, 100 to 200 clergy leaving. That's quite a lot.
How many clergy do they have?
It's a state church, so I'd say a lot. They're paid by the government, so get a government job in the church.
That's what I mean. That sounds like a big number of people to leave. I mean, it's not like having like a split and like losing like 2 pastors and like 3 congregations or something like that. This is
probably 20 or 30 odd million people there as a state church with 10 million members or so. 200 clergy is not really that much.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's compared to like, but then like compared to the LCA,
the country.
No.
Yeah, compared to the LCA where we've got like 1.26% of the population in Australia. It does. If we lost 100 clergy, I'm not even sure how many clergy are in the LCA. Right. For 100 clergy.
We should ask the Norwegians to come over to Australia.
Oh yeah, we could do with some clergy.
Screen them first. That might not be the only thing that might be the only thing that they're conservative in.
Well, I've had a lot. People, the slippery slope argument where people go, if you bring in women's ordination, then you bring in homosexual ordination. Well, the two don't necessarily correspond because there are plenty of people. That's why, like, the North American Lutheran Church exists because they wanted to ordain women, but they didn't want to ordain homosexuals. Yeah. So
when was that?
10 years?
Yeah.
No. It was within 10 years or 10 years ago. Or something like that.
It's I think it's within the 2000s. So.
Another 10.
No, they broke off from it. They're not going to change.
Yeah, they broke off
because
they were part of the ELCA, and when ELCA started on.
What did LCA? How many were in Australia? Different divisions of Lutheran Church.
When?
Now and previously.
Now. Okay. Well, what do we got?
We've got the LCA, which is the majority.
The majority. Then you've got your like the little breakaway groups you've got in Australia. You've got the ELCR, the OELC, ELSA. Technically, you've got ELS as a separate one because they've had a bit of a. There's a congregation that's in connection with them but doesn't actually belong to them.
In America,
Yeah. Well, they're in Australia, but they belong to ELS America. You got the AELC. You've got a bunch of independents. You've got the Growth Lutheran Network started over in Western Australia the start of last year, and then you've also it just come on the list of independents. But then you've got the Living Waters Fellowship in like Wagga Wagga. I just separate that from the other independents because the other independents are your more conservative.
And they all work together, don't they?
Yeah, they are all conservatives that work together. They're your ex-AELC ones. Whereas the Living Waters Fellowship one was a more liberal breakaway. And actually, as far as the last time I was talking to the pastor there, they've got some kind of fellowship and connections with the Growth Lutheran Network over in Western Australia.
Okay.
So we're pretty much looking at like 8 groups or so.
That was 9,
Yeah, 8 or 9 groups in Australia. But apart from the LCA, the biggest one would be the AELC, which has like 8 congregations and 3 pastors. Although then the ELCR has been around. They've got like 6 congregations, a bunch of house churches, 3 pastors. Because they've been around for quite a long time. So
how do they ordain their ministers?
Themselves. They just ordain them the way the Lutherans did when we got kicked out of the Catholic Church. The congregations ordain their pastors. I think the big question is how do they train their pastors? They don't have a big seminary and they just train them under other pastors. But so that's how many groups we've got in Australia. You're looking at like 9 groups, but besides the LCA, they're pretty.
The LCA would be more than 95% of the Lutherans.
Oh yeah, you definitely have that. Although like we discussed that in class there. According to the census, the Lutherans in Australia is much bigger than the membership books of LCA, because you've got so many people that go to like Lutheran schools, and so when the census comes around,
I'm a Lutheran.
Yeah, the census comes around, they put that down.
Yeah, right.
So we've got
also, you got old Lutherans. Sorry, I shouldn't use that term.
But plus,
grandparents that were Lutherans, and so, grandma, what am I again? Oh, I'm a Lutheran. Okay.
Plus, that's only, like I said, those 9 groups. That only includes like your English speakings. We still have your Latvians, Germans, Indonesian, Chinese.
But they're also not. The Chinese one's getting big.
Some of them, some of them you could just put under the umbrella of the LCA, but then there are a few groups there that have remained in no fellowship with the LCA.
Like, I think there's some churches that are still in fellowship with their parent church over in Europe.
I'm pretty sure there's a German congregation in like Melbourne or something that's in no fellowship with the LCA, and they're still connected with the German church in in Germany, the Lutheran church in Germany.
The German church in Germany, not any of those non-German churches in Germany.
But so that's like how the groups in it's mainly LCA, but there are a few little groups around. So it would be quite interesting if we had something like 100 pastors leave the LCA.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if we have 100 pastors in the LCA.
I think we'd have 100, but I'm not sure if it's too much more. Because you forget about a lot of places when you start to count them.
That came from your dismissal of the slippery slope argument for that church that split because they agreed with women's ordination but not homosexual.
Oh yeah, the North American.
But then you were saying earlier that once the head of the snake gets in, then the
whole can fall. That was other Joseph.
That was the other Joseph.
That was other Joseph? Just remember which Joseph said it, Joseph?
Yeah, Joseph, come on.
You didn't disagree with it.
Oh yeah, well the slippery slope argument is a reasonable argument to make. But it is
in circumstances.
It's not necessarily foolproof, because there's plenty of people. I can look at plenty of theologians who'll go, they hold to this view, and you'll go, they're a crazy liberal, they hold to this, therefore they must hold to all these. But you'll go and you'll look what they believe, and they go, that's strange. How do you hold to A but not B? I mean, it's the logical
the same for conservative as well.
Yeah, it is. It goes. The logical progression would be if you hold to A, then you'd hold to B, C, D, whatever. But you'll have people that hold to like A and D, but not B and C and stuff that. So. I think a big problem is it comes down now to we live in this postmodern age where everything comes down to your own personal experiences and personal interpretations. So I can be.
That doesn't mean it's true for me.
Yeah, I can be for this thing, but then I can also not be for this thing. So like I can take the Bible completely literal here, but then I can just take it figuratively in this area. And I can emphasise this part of the Bible, but I can totally just reject other parts.
What you're saying is you can pick and choose in the Bible.
Yeah, and you can pick and choose what theological stances you go. So I can be for women's ordination, but then I don't have to be for something else in that area.
And then you can also read the Bible and say, this is obviously talking about exactly how it reads in the modern context.
Yeah.
And then other parts, this is obviously talking about exactly how it reads, well, as far as we're aware, in its own context.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets messed up.
And this obviously doesn't make any sense unless you're a doctor of theology and mastered exegesis.
What? You don't understand this?
What? I understand it all.
You're a doctor.
It might not be true for you, but it's true for me.
Yeah, exactly. Joseph's got it in one.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we've gone on reasonably long enough. I'd like to thank the Josephs for coming on to this episode.
You're welcome.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks, Joseph.
The pleasure's all yours.
Yeah. Thanks, Joseph. You're all welcome back anytime to come back to the fortress. So, for all those who have managed to put up with us for this week, thank you. I hope you'll join us again for another episode of A Mighty Fortress. Goodbye and God bless.
Bye, Mum.
God bless.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to A Mighty Fortress. A Mighty Fortress